I've got it. Got it. All right. Our speaker tonight is Claire Stebbins, and Claire is the chief worker bee. She's going to try to say someone else does all the work, but Claire is the face of Reading Allies. How's that? For Tuscaloosa, which is a fantastic program. Many of you have heard about it before. Susan and I first heard about it when Kim Bailey sent around something because the chancellor's office was invested in this. And that's how we knew this program was there. It's now out there in the newspapers on a regular basis and getting as much attention as it deserves, except not quite enough, because that's one reason we have Claire here tonight to tell us more so that we can circulate all sorts of information, because she's going to always need volunteers. Just because she gets a few right now doesn't mean she doesn't need them in a few more weeks doing something else. So without further ado, Claire Stebbins, and I will mute everybody else so that Claire can speak without being disturbed. All righty, take it away, Claire.
Well, Carol, thank you so much for having me with this wonderful group. I know it's so, Susan, it's so nice to see your face again. I don't think I've seen you really since the summer. Susan was one of our wonderful volunteers this summer. Carol has been a continual volunteer for us. I know Catherine, I see you smiling that we've been trying to get you in, but with the COVID situation, it's a little uneasy. And I know that's the same way for so many of our volunteers right now who aren't so comfortable yet being in schools, particularly when the masking requirements keep changing. But hopefully we are on the downside of all of that, and that will not be an issue so much going forward, fingers crossed. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Tonight, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit, share a little bit of my personal story to start off. This is something I've realized that everybody kind of now, as Carol said, like you're always out there talking about Reading Allies, but I don't always do a good job of explaining why it's so important to me personally and why I am so invested in the little worker bee that I am for this specific work. Going into Reading Allies, where we've been, where we're going, and where we're at now. And just talking a little bit about the structure of the program and some ways that we can continually engage both this greater Tuscaloosa community as well as the state of Alabama in this shared mission. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I apologize if you see all of my tabs open because there are quite a few. So let's pull this up. All righty. So Reading Allies is a program that focuses on bringing struggling readers in first, second, and third grade up to grade level in reading. I'll get into a little bit of our data, but overwhelmingly, we have had tremendous success bringing students up to grade level. So much so that usually in a semester, about half of our kids roll out of our program and no longer need our additional support because they are making that significant of gains in just that one semester time span. But I'm going to start off tonight talking to you a little bit about myself, where I come from, and why this work is so important to me. So I'm a native of Dayton, Ohio, in between Dayton and Cincinnati, just about an hour from Kentucky. And so I really grew up in this area with two parents for teachers, both teaching elementary school in low-income school districts. My mom actually teaches struggling readers, so I always thought it was normal for, to come home and your mom was bringing books and assessing you to see where you were at. But I'm going to start off by showing you a picture of kind of like my family. So as you can see, all don't look alike, but from left to right is Kamari, myself, my brother Adam, and Mark. And so I'm really going to talk a little bit about Mark and Kamari and Adam for a second. So my brother played football. We lived right across from the middle school when I was growing up. We lived in between the middle school and the high school, and there was a Section 8 project that was just a couple blocks over from where I grew up. And so on Wednesdays, my brother played football, and they always had a break in between the time of school got out and the time for the game. And so my mom would always pick up my brother and a couple of his friends in our big, bulky 2001 white rusted out Yukon and drive them back to our house and have a team meal for them before it was time for them to go to their game. And so one day, in a very teacher fashion of how my mom is, she had picked up all the boys in their jerseys from school, taken them to the family meal, and she saw Mark walking down our street and said, Adam, he has your jersey on. He's your teammate. Invite him to dinner. And she pulled the car over. Mark jumped in, and we kind of joked that he never left. We found out in this time period that Mark had been in 5 different Dayton public schools within 8 years, creating significant gaps in what he was taught at different points, particularly in his reading and math skills. And so these football games really kind of became this sticking point where we kind of joked that Mark came, got in that car that one time, and he never really left, and he truly became part of our family. We found out that we were kind of watching on the sidelines of their games, all playing football. And Mark, I mean, he is 14 in this photo. So you can see I'm 5'8" for reference. So he was that big as a freshman in high school. And we're like, man, he really should be on the football field, but why is he on the sidelines? And so just from my mom with her teacher background and knowing some of the teachers at the middle school, started poking around and seeing they're like, he can't play because of his grades. He's ineligible because of his grades. And so the more and more we got to know Mark and his story, we found out that he really had some significant gaps where he could not read the work that he was doing in his classroom, whether that was a word problem in math, a science passage, or the books he was supposed to be reading for class. And it was no fault of his own. It was the fault that his school systems had continually passed him along and did not have the support that he needed to truly be successful. But he wanted to be successful. And so over time, after school, we got to the point where Mark would come home with us. When we were in high school, I would drive Adam and Mark home after practices and things like that. And we would sit down and we would do homework together. And I will never forget, my mom got to the point where she was the one really going to all of the parent-teacher conferences for my brother and Mark. And the one time she was running late for my brother Adam's conference to Mark's. And I was like, oh, I'll go with him really quick and just say you'll be on your way, because I had conferences also. And I walked in the room and it was the teacher who had taught my AP calculus class. And he was Mark's algebra teacher. And I walked in with him. And the first thing he said to me was, why are you here with him? And I can be a little feisty, if you will. And my immediate response was, well, why would I not be here? And that has really been a pivotal moment in my life. I think we are all called as humans, and really taking that phrase, love thy neighbor as thyself, to heart, for us to all say, why wouldn't I be here? Why wouldn't I help? Why wouldn't I be an advocate in somebody else's life? So with that, Mark, he got up in his grades. He was doing really well in sports, and he is doing super well now as a very productive adult, and just really a whole part of my personal story. And I'm so grateful for that experience with him also. And it got to the point to kind of pulling Kamari, where Kamari came to my brother and said, hey, I heard that your mom and your sister and your dad, they teach people. Can I come over after school too and learn? Which just says, as a high school student, to seek that out on your own. And once you had started to hear things, the kids really want to learn. And Kamari, sweetest kid in the whole entire world. And he is now successful in the military, has a young family, and him and Mark are both doing great. But I wanted to start this conversation off by showing you why this is so important to me, and why I believe that every student really does want to learn. So this next slide that I'm going to show y'all, this is a picture, and I left the timestamp on it up here, at the top, because the timestamp is of 5:41 a.m. And that is Eastern time also. But in June, when school is almost out, Mark had a final that day and he was really struggling. And he's like, Claire, will you please just get up with me and help me study? There are some things I still can't really understand, but I want to be successful. And so I want to start this conversation off by really framing a perspective that all kids, regardless of age, regardless of level, every child wants to be successful if they're given the support and the tools to be successful. And this is where I really want to focus also on this theme of community, that if any child has a community around them who is willing to take the time to invest in them and to meet them where they're at they will absolutely thrive. And this is something that really, when I was in high school, I started thinking about what if we could share with broader communities what it means to have that investment, what it means to let a child know who might have been cast aside otherwise, that they do have an advocate, that they do have somebody who wants to see them be successful and is willing to roll up their sleeves and do that work alongside of them. And so that is what brings me to Reading Allies today and why literacy is so vitally important to me. So just as a primer, some background, students who are not reading on grade level by the end of the 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school altogether. If we look at our percentages of our incarcerated population, over 80% of that population cannot read on a 3rd grade level. So you think about what a loss that is for us as a society, that if we had gotten these people when they were 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders, what that might mean for our society and our country as an entire fabric. How would that alter our makeup as a country? For all students who cannot read by the end of 3rd grade equates to about $260,000 over time in lost taxes, earnings, etc. per student. So when you multiply that by the millions of students who are not reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade across our country, we are talking about billions and billions of dollars. There's an interesting statistic that the Annie E. Casey Foundation, actually, when they were going through and doing one of their more recent reports on literacy research, that there was a time span from the mid 1990s to 2008 that if we had invested and brought at least, not even all of the children, but a significant portion of children up to grade level by the end of the 3rd grade during that time period, that was about 10 years, we would have added $1 trillion to the United States GDP, which is outstanding when you think about how much money that is, and what an easy fix that would have been if we would have just invested the time and money and effort to actually fix it. And so that brings us to the Reading Allies and the Reading Allies impact. So Reading Allies got started back in 2017 when veteran educator Jeannie Burkhalter came to Vicki Holt and Dr. Derry at the Tuscaloosa City Schools and said, you know, we have all of these resources in Tuscaloosa. We have not only the University of Alabama, but Shelton State and Stillman College, but we have over 60% of our kids aren't reading on grade level. There has to be something that we can do together. Meanwhile, at the same time, the Rotary Club of Tuscaloosa was celebrating their 100th anniversary. And the leaders of the Rotary Club really got together and said, you know, we don't want to just put a stagnant entity. We don't want just a statue or a park bench somewhere. We want to see if we can really, really move the needle on student success. And so they also went to Dr. Daria and said, you know, what is your greatest need right now? And he said, getting our children reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade. So with an initial $100,000 investment by the Tuscaloosa Rotary Club, both into what would eventually become the Reading Allies program, but was formerly known as Book Buddies, and into the libraries of Martin Luther King Elementary School, we launched our first, what is now the Reading Allies program. And so how we got started was a much more informal way of just pairing volunteers with students one-on-one to work through different phonics games and activities. Since then, the University of Alabama system came on board and said, you know, this is something that we think is a critical need for our state and will impact our universities as we hope to see these students become part of our university fabric across the state. And so they were very generous in an initial gift to hire me and to help formalize the Reading Allies program into what it is now. Over the next 3 years, I guess 2 years now, we're in the 1st year, the Tuscaloosa City and County schools have found the Reading Allies program to be so impactful that they have dedicated nearly $1 million to put the program in all 16 of their high need Title I schools by the end of the 2023-24 school year. And from then, the Tuscaloosa Education Foundation is currently fundraising to help pick up the tab for the program once their COVID money that they are currently using for the program runs out. And to talk about a little bit of why the program has been so successful and why there has been that investment, I like to show you the data. So we are very much a data-driven program. The Alabama Reading Initiative, the Department of Early Childhood Education, and the Department of Education, pardon me, has classified Reading Allies as a highly successful program that also fits the needs of the Alabama Literacy Act, which that act says, although it is being delayed now, it is appearing, that any student who is not reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade will be retained unless they meet certain markers. And so with that law in place, with knowing the need across the state, truly, if you give us as Reading Allies one of your very lowest of the low struggling readers, either 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, over the course of a year, which is really only 20 weeks, 40, 30-minute sessions, 81% of our students go from the lowest of the low to reading on or above grade level after just 1 year of programming. A big thing in education that we talk about is summer slide, and how when students come back to us in between that spring and fall semester, that sometimes they have lost learning. Well, we have found in our research and our data that when these students that we've had who met grade level came back as new 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders, 100% of those students continued to test on grade level and did not need any additional support. So this is why there is such a full backing and consistency and investment from our schools and our state in the program, because we have the data to show, this really is working. Again, I shared earlier that about half of our kids really only stay in the program 1 semester, which is only 10 weeks, 20 sessions, and only 30-minute sessions per week. So it really is effective and really meeting the needs of the students and the schools. And so getting into this research-driven instruction and what makes the program so successful. So the Reading Allies model is we utilize the research best practices and the science of reading. So the science of reading is something that is kind of a hot button word now with literacy acts being passed and things like that. But it really is just taking decades and decades of a body of research about how to teach struggling readers effectively and putting it into a more formalized process that is more accessible to all of our teachers and to train them properly. And that is what the approach that we have taken to our model as well. All of our students, our Reading Allies specialists, are the ones who actually write lessons for students, and those are retired teachers. They go and they do an initial benchmark assessment of all the students who will be participating for the semester, going over, do they know their letters if they're a 1st grader who may not have gone to kindergarten or pre-K, going through the phonics inventory, seeing where exactly they might need to start at in their phonics progression, going over their high frequency words of, where are they at in these words that they have to know by memory, as well as in their leveled books assessment, saying, a level 10 book, this is too hard, this is at that child's frustration level, but a level 9 book is right at that instructional level, which is exactly where they should be. Although the structure of the lessons is the same, it goes over this 4-section reread, word work, new read, and writing. The lessons are individualized. So what one student to your right may be doing, although again, that same format and structure, the content of it will most likely be very different than the student over to your right or left, as it is highly, highly individualized. I was actually in a meeting with one of our principals from Martin Luther King Elementary today, and she said what these specialists do and what this program does is give these children a prescription to fix where their critical needs are at. And I think that is such a great way of putting it, because really all of our assessment information, it is a prescription of this is the first thing that we need to work on, and here's how we're going to grow in our lesson planning and in these student skills over the course of this semester. And one thing that I am so passionate about is how I talked about earlier is when you're pulling together community members, whether it's a 16-year-old high school student or an 86-year-old retiree, getting them in these schools who they may not have stepped into these schools otherwise. The lessons are delivered one-on-one by our trained community volunteers, and I train our volunteers. They go through a 30-minute training session where they learn how to effectively work with a struggling reader, strategies of good readers, as well as behavior tips. We don't really have any behavior issues with our kids because they are so eager to get to be with their volunteer. Again, another thing that the principal I was with talked about today, to use her words, Dr. Collins said, the one thing she said, I'm a hard cookie to crumble. The one thing that I never wanted was were volunteers coming into my school and having assumptions about my students, or having preconceived notions or thinking that there was a stigma attached to my students. And she said, and overwhelmingly, our volunteers come in and they love those children and they are really rolling up their sleeves and they are doing the work. Our volunteers are the ones doing the hard work, sitting down one-on-one and showing up for these students in a way that I think is so unique and special to the Tuscaloosa area right now. That I don't really think this is happening, honestly, anywhere across the country to the volume that it is now. So much so that when we talk about putting the program into all 16 of our high need schools, that is going to call on 900 community volunteers in the Tuscaloosa County area to fill this need. Right now, we are working with 350 volunteers, and we had to turn some volunteers away, and we really haven't even started a full-blown push. So this is kind of our dipping the toe in the water of this beginning push to really get the word out there and say, you know, come on in, bring your friends, like let's volunteer 30 minutes a week for 10 weeks together to invest in our community and invest in our children. And I think this quote from Dr. Daria really speaks for itself of the value that he finds and the school system finds in the program. Dr. Daria says, because of the high quality instruction in school and participation in Reading Allies, our students are moving from struggling readers to proficient readers at high rates. Reading Allies is a big win for all. Dr. Daria will never do anything that is not great for his children, and to have his endorsement and the city schools and the county schools continual support for this program, both in manpower, serving as volunteers, and financially to put this program in all of their neediest schools, really says so much about what they think about the program. And we will be calling on y'all as we add in new schools, particularly next fall. We are adding in 5 new Tuscaloosa City schools on top of the 5 we are already currently in, as well as 2 new county schools. So that looks like a jump in a 400 additional volunteers by next fall. So we are really going to be doing a big push for volunteers and would love for y'all to be part of that, and to engage other organizations that you're a part of, friends, family members, to maybe sign up to volunteer at a school together or adopt a school if you're in an organization, things like that. So I am going to stop talking. And I think this is a very engaging group, it seems like. And so I would love to answer any questions y'all may have, talk more about any things that you find particularly interesting in, things like that.
Claire, I'm going to ask a question at first, and I'll couch this that about 4 years ago, I did some stint as Observer Corps, which is a function of league things where we go to public meetings and just observe and then report back to the league. And I went to the Tuscaloosa City Schools before this program was even born. Mm-hmm. They were talking about how old the holdings were in the library, and I was thinking about old books and how, although we like antique books sometimes, but how for a kid, an old book is kind of not very encouraging. And yet I am struck by the materials, everything down to the binder, the books, the pencils are sharpened and they're long. They're not even stubby. Whose grant, or how are you all cobbling that together? Because this is not inexpensive.
You know, actually, in the grand scheme of education, it is a very inexpensive program to do what we are doing. So the Reading Allies specialists are paid at an hourly rate. They are paid $25 an hour and they work about 12 hours a week for 12 weeks, or for 10 to 12 weeks. So that's about anywhere between $3,000 to $4,000 a semester, depending on what school district and how many children that they are serving. The supplies, the books that you are working with, we have here, actually, I'll show y'all because I'm in my office.
They're beautiful, they're fresh, and there's a new one each time for the kids.
One on the Mississippi, this is a higher level book. So this is on the Mississippi River, but you can see they're very high quality level text. And so that's something Vicki Holt, for any of y'all who know Vicki, she was one of the first people in the whole state of Alabama trained in the best practices of teaching young struggling readers. this is the background also that I come from, although not formally trained in the way that Vicki is. And so we were both, when we were putting this program together, we knew that high quality text had to be the very first thing. And these leveled books there's a couple of publishing companies who do this better than others. We use the Rigby PM books, and to get those books set up and to have them purchased, it's about an upfront almost $3,000, a little under $3,000. And that gets you about over 250 titles, but that is a one-time cost for these schools. And so the schools who have been adding this in the Tuscaloosa City and County schools have been so gracious and have found so much value in the program that they have allocated their COVID money to pay for this upstart in a lot of their schools. The Rotary Club at Martin Luther King is the one who paid for those at first when we first started, and then the Junior League at Holt Elementary paid for them also when we started at Holt Elementary. So really there have been a lot of great community forces at play helping to fund this. But really, in terms of materials for the binders, the pencils, whole books, whole 9 yards, that's about a little, barely under, depending on shipping. And I know we're in a little bit of an odd time with how our supply chain issues are going. But at the high end of what that cost is a little under $4,000 as a one-time cost. And really the only recurring cost is that specialist, the retired teacher who's writing these lessons. So when you think about the money that schools are paying for programs and publishing companies and things like that that are not nearly as individualized for their students as what we're doing, it really is a cost-effective way for schools to invest and have intervention for their children. They can use their ESSER funds, they can use their Title I funds, they can look at community grants. There's a whole bunch of different ways that schools are able to pay for this.
Thank you. So other questions from other people? Catherine.
Claire, thank you. It was lovely to hear about your history. And I was thinking, I bet your mother is really proud.
She is.
And so my question is, I remember hearing about the Alabama Reading Initiative and knowing that people were really proud of it, but I really didn't know what it was. But I knew it was about, getting third grade level and so on. Then you just mentioned it. So could you talk about the relation of the Reading Allies to the Reading Initiative? Yeah,
absolutely. So the Alabama Reading Initiative is a section of the Alabama Department of Education. And so they really, in the early 90s, and Vicki Holt would be a much better one to go into a little bit more detail about ARI. That's kind of what they're known as around the state. They help place regional reading coaches across the state to help work with the local school level reading coaches, to help train them in the science of reading, to kind of bounce around, particularly in those high risk schools, so to speak. There is what they call them, the tier 3 schools, and to provide support for them to help them focus on how they can better instruct in the classroom, better instruct in their intervention practices, and things like that. And so Vicki was one of the first people ever to join ARI and be part of that as a regional. She went around and trained different people how to be successful reading teachers. And so the Alabama Reading Initiative, they're really kind of like, you know what, if it has the data to prove that this teaches kids how to read, we are all about it. We are all about creativity. We are all about ensuring that we are doing what is best for our kids. So we're really grateful to have that relationship with them as that subsidy of the Department of Education. They've been tasked with a lot in regards to the Literacy Act, of fleshing out different components of that and helping the legislature in some ways, along with that, of going through, what publishers are good for different things, the different testing requirements, things of that nature. But their main focus is putting those regional coaches in place that are to support the school level and school district level readings coaches is what they call them. So that is their function.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yep, absolutely.
Other comments or questions? Peggy.
You're talking about starting up with needing 400 more volunteers for the fall.
Yes, ma'am.
When do you start recruiting? When do you start training them?
Yes.
do they start working?
So we will start recruiting much earlier than we have in the past. The program will start generally in the fall. We start the week after Labor Day weekend because we know a lot of people are there. So about early to mid-September is when the program will begin in the fall. We will start probably recruiting late July into early August. You'll probably see my face on WVUA. You'll start seeing a lot more social media posts out there. The Chamber of Commerce is a great partner for us in Tuscaloosa. Carolyn Tubbs with the Adopt a School program is fantastic about putting things in the newsletter, helping us get connected on social media. But we will start recruiting at least a month out for those volunteers with the understanding that the program will probably not start until beginning to mid-September. And I should mention this, that we offer various times and days of the week. So right now we are offering volunteer times anytime Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. They are predetermined times that work with the school schedule, but there are times during the school day as well as times after school. So generally speaking, if somebody wants to volunteer, they can find a 30-minute time slot, particularly when we're in 12 different schools, that fits their schedule. But training will be held via Zoom with as many people. There's possible to get everybody in one room together, but training will be held via Zoom probably about the week before volunteering actually starts, for the week or two before volunteering actually starts.
I was thinking about having you come and give a talk at Ollie. That's what, our retirement, because these are retired people who might have time.
Yes.
to squeeze another 30 minutes in. I don't know if the bonus programs are full for the summer or not. I can inquire. Do you know?
I have mentioned Claire's name to Sandra for her list. Right now, Sandra's got some family health issues, so she didn't answer me back, but I mentioned Claire's name, but I can mention it again because I had given her a list, to be honest, of people who had spoken to League who I thought would make good bonus programs. But I think it'd be wonderful because Claire does, frankly, I run into Ollie members back in the summer and over at Holt right now. I don't always know their names because we're not wearing name tags, but I know that they're Ollie members and we talk to each other. So there are people out there. Susan, would you mind talking about what is involved if you've never taught reading before? Because I think it's important for people to know what kinds of commitment you have to make and what kinds of things they do for you. Would you talk to that?
Sure. I have not taught reading before. And so when I did this during the summer, it was eye-opening for me because the time that you spend with the student is divided up into several activities, one of which is to play some games, different games like you've got cards and you have to read the word and figure out how it's pronounced. You have sections of a book that you've read last week that you go back and see if you can read better this week. You have a new section of the book that you read. There's a little writing component where you write down, what happened in the story. And it's just, and the kids are delightful. They're just wonderful. Carol and I happen to teach the same student on different days. So that was kind of fun to be able to compare, what had happened in Carol's time with her and my time with her. I'm ready to sign up again, Claire.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to make it clear that Claire gives you a sheet. It says
Yes.
5 minutes, do this.
Yes.
And then there's a place where you give feedback. And then 10 minutes, do this. And it's timed better than, and in fact, you're getting, it's changed since last summer. It's refined. I can see you've zeroed in on some things really nicely. But it's very much do this. If you're there 10 minutes ahead of time, 5 minutes ahead of time, and you read your instructions, then you know what to do when the kid comes in. They make it very, very, these are the words to work on today.
Yeah.
These are the sounds to work on today.
Yeah.
Play this game this way.
And I wasn't always timely, but
Yeah.
they do give you good instructions.
Well, on that note, Carol, I'm so encouraged to hear that you have seen changes in the lesson planning, because Vicki Holt, again, she is a worker bee. I mean, she and I joke, I'm the redheaded stepchild upstairs. I'm like their adopted daughter now. But over the Christmas break, she spent 75 hours going through every single child's lesson plan who we had worked with over the fall semester and seeing, what were we doing well? What could we improve upon? And what did our children really need? And out of that, we saw by and large, mainly as a result of the pandemic, that first off, these children they had access to books on computers and tablets, but they never had to pick up a pencil and write. And we saw that a lot of them were much stronger readers, but when it came to words that they didn't know, they had never had to decode words and sound them out using their phonic skills to match letters to their sounds. And so we really went through with our specialists, and we are so grateful that we have such great specialists who are, even though they're retired teachers, they are so eager to continue learning and doing what is best for students. And so we went through, we retrained them and said, every single lesson, we are really going to hone in on one skill. We are going to make sure that first off, students know how to decode words. They can use letter cards and they can build words on their own and they can make the sounds. And then we're going to see that if they can write those words and really apply that so that we know they have mastered that skill and that they will be able to repeat that behavior in the classroom as well. So we have really refined it. We can absolutely say now it fits within 30 minutes. Because we have made it just as structured as we possibly can, as concise as we possibly can. But I always tell our teachers in our schools that we will never do anything that is not the absolute best for these students in the school. And we're really starting to see even more growth than we had seen before, which is hard to believe that we're seeing even more growth than what it was, because the numbers have continually blown us away.
Will there be a program this summer, or will it skip till fall?
So that's what we're kind of exploring right now. I know in the summer, it was just really difficult. The Tuscaloosa City Schools particularly, they run their summer program. It's predetermined, it's 4 weeks. And for the program to really be successful, you have to get at least 18 to 20 sessions in. And so that would mean that these specialists are turning over individualized lessons for up to 15 children every single night for a month straight, which that is a lot to ask of our specialists and a lot of work. That takes a lot of time. So we have offered that to our specialists. I think they're thinking it over if they want to take on that commitment, particularly in the summer. Definitely an option. It might be a possibility. Won't be to the scale that it will be in the fall when we're adding in all these schools and extra children. But I will be happy to keep y'all in the loop if that is an option this summer.
Other questions, comments? Tom.
Claire, thanks for joining us this evening. And I have a couple of questions. The first and main one is for an organization or an individual who might want to contribute funds or manpower to the effort. What's the point of contact for them?
Yes, that is a great question. So you are welcome to contact me. I'm on the steering committee of the Tuscaloosa Education Foundation, working with Reading Allies, and the Tuscaloosa Education Foundation is also in a fundraising campaign to continue on the Reading Allies program in all of these schools once the COVID funds from the school systems runs out. So they're helping to raise money right now. They're in a big push, and I would love to connect you and anybody else with them to make that donation if that is something or an organization may be interested in. In terms of manpower, I coordinated all the volunteers. So again, I will be your point of contact for probably any and all things in Tuscaloosa.
Okay, my second question. Do you have an age limit? If you look close at me, you'll know I've been around a few years. So do you have a point of aging out in this group?
No, we absolutely do not. That's why we have volunteers that are, I mean, again, high school students to like 90 years old. I mean, and that's something that I find is so wonderful about this program is there's not many places in our community where you get a high school student, a college student, a stay-at-home mom, a banker, a dentist, a retiree, all in one room together with a shared mission, doing the same thing and making that impact all at once collectively. So there is no age limit. We are welcoming to everybody who's willing to serve with us.
All three of our children went through the city school system, and they all benefited greatly from it. So my wife and I like to be able to contribute to the city school system.
Well, we would welcome that, and thank you so much for your kindness.
She's writing your name down, Tom. Okay, Catherine, you had another question. Catherine Davies?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm a linguist, so I know how terrible English spelling is, right? So what I'm thinking is, do you have any experience of students saying, what do you mean GH is pronounced F, as in enough, right? So do you get that, or is it all sort of planned out so that they don't encounter those words?
Yeah, so with struggling readers, a lot of our readers are coming to us needing to learn their CVCs, so their consonant vowel words that are mat, cat, pat, then getting into their blends where it's an FL, BR, the digraphs. So that's one thing that we don't really quite, that's at the end of our phonics progression, and usually we don't have students that are quite there, because if they're at that very end of our phonics progression, they can be successful in their classrooms without our help. So we definitely have much more students who are working on those decodable sort of sounds and letters and things where we can manipulate letter cards, different things like that, so they can really make that full sensory connection with the phonics that they are doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other ones? Other questions? Annie?
Sure. I'm Claire. What is your contact information?
Yes. So you know what? It might be easier. I'm happy to give you my cell phone number, and I'll also type my email address in the chat.
Okay.
So I know, but my cell phone number is 937-789-8606. And I just realized it's probably going to be on YouTube, but that's okay. But that's my cell phone number. Feel free to give me a call. Happy to answer any questions. I am also typing my email address into the chat. I'm also happy if y'all want to send along any, I'm happy to send along flyers and one-pagers, things like that. If you want to share with any other organizations you're in, want to just spread the word in an organic way, happy. With churches, we're really looking to engage different faith-based communities also in a lot of these schools, because we know that is just such a powerful volunteer force. Happy to send along any of those things.
Thank you.
And I'll be glad to send out her email address with the way that you got the link for this meeting. That's easy to do. I don't know if we can blur your phone number on the YouTube.
That's okay. If I get some weird calls, they'll be like, are you interested in teaching a child how to read?
You never know.
Go on tour.
Oh, anyone else have a question? Claire, many years ago, I worked through, this is decades ago, worked through Project Literacy with a 50-year-old man who had never learned to read at that opportune moment in life. He was so smart that he could compensate. He had never been without a job. He had raised a family, but he was desperate to have reading skills. And that was such a gobsmack for me, because reading had been a part of my world before I remembered it. And I could not really understand at first what life would be like if you could not keep up as a reader. And most of the people that are on this call were good students and read well and had families that did that. Also, I'll just say, a lot of our families, if there are two adults there, they might have to have 3 jobs, and they don't have some of the time to spend with their children that perhaps in an earlier time or a more affluent, not Title I setting, families did. So as a part of community service, I thank you for what all you all are doing, because I've been really, I'll say this about the Observer Corps, I learned a lot about Tuscaloosa City Schools and what they're trying to do, both nutritionally for the body and for the keeping kids up to grade level. And of course, our future voters, if they cannot read, they're not going to make wise decisions when it comes to time to be voters. So we have a stake in this as League of Women Voters. So other comments or questions, things that you would like to say? We can have the closing hymn and pass the offering plate and move on down the road to the State of the Union address tonight. Any announcements that need to be made before we conclude? I thank you all, and I thank Claire so much for coming to talk to us tonight. And I thank our visitors for coming. Anyone who's interested in volunteering with Claire, I will send you her email address. And if you're interested in becoming a member of the League of Women Voters, just answer back to our league, either our league email or my personal one if you have that. And I'll be glad to send you the materials and remind you how that process works. So love to see you all here tonight. Thank you for taking a nice evening away and coming in. And I'm going to stop recording now.